From Incest Aversion to Incest Taboos. Unlike most other primates, human brothers and sisters form long and enduring social bonds. Among hunter-gatherer populations, brothers and sisters often live in the same bands. In many other traditional societies, either brothers or sisters continue to live in their home community, while the other sex marries outside the community, but sibling bonds usually remain strong. Like other primates, the most important factors in establishing a brother-sister bond is familiarity while growing up. For opposite-sex siblings, this early familiarity breeds both deep affection and sexual aversion. An immense variety of kinship systems, sets of social norms, found across diverse small-scale societies, have harnessed and extended these innate psychological tendencies to distant and even remote relatives. As mentioned, social norms identify classificatory siblings and stipulate that these individuals should be treated like real siblings. These norms could be standalone social rules, like putting the fork on the left, but the fact that they tap our evolved incest psychology probably makes them easier to learn, internalize, and enforce on others. However, in these societies, no one completely confuses their real, genetic siblings for their classificatory siblings, as some famous anthropologists seem to suggest. In my own work in Fiji, for example, I've occasionally heard villagers refer to their true sister or brother. One time I was standing outside of a Fijian kitchen house, wondering about dinner, when I heard the wife of the house defending herself to her husband after she'd given the entire stock of the little store she'd recently set up to her older brother. "But he's my real brother," she said defensively in Fijian, as she went on to describe how her brother came and sat so humbly at the low-status end of the house and performed the simple carry-carry ritual of request. She felt moved, and that she had to help him, even if it meant the store would close permanently. It was salient to her and her husband that it was her real brother, and not merely one of her many classificatory brothers, who had made the request. Tapping this real versus classificatory sibling difference in the context of the incest taboo, my Fijian team and I wrote up 2 stories and had a random sample of adults from a couple of villages respond to our stories. As background, recall Kula. In these villages, social norms demand that brothers and sisters, real or classificatory, must never be alone in a house and must never talk to each other. Also, note that village houses have their 3 doors open all day, if someone is home, so a passerby can usually get a glance inside. In our first story, a real brother and sister were sitting inside a house alone, chatting. Our second version was the same, except the siblings were now classificatory. Can you guess how the villagers responded? My undergraduates usually guess wrong. Though Yasawans felt that the pair were doing something wrong in both versions of the story, it was the actions of the classificatory siblings that really got the community riled up and were turned into the subject of serious and rapidly spreading gossip. The villagers felt that while the real sibling shouldn't be breaking the rules, it was minor and nothing would happen. It seemed that they understood that innate incest aversion was prophylactic, so chatting was very unlikely to lead to sex. However, for classificatory siblings, the only effective prophylactic was the continuous monitoring and potential wrath of the community. Chatting alone, in most societies, is often an important step on the road to sex. This is the difference between incest aversion and incest taboos. Incest taboos are social norms that evolved culturally to regulate sex and pair bonding between non-close relatives by harnessing innate intuitions and emotional reactions that originally arose via genetic evolution to suppress sexual interest among close relatives, especially siblings. By harnessing innate incest aversion and labeling distant relatives as brothers and sisters, cultural evolution seized a powerful lever to control human behavior, since incest taboos can strongly influence mating and marriage, and kin-based altruism can be extended through social norms. If you control mating and marriage, you get a grip on much of the larger social structure, and even aspects of people's cognition and motivation. Of course, to construct kinship systems, cultural evolution also harnesses our reciprocity psychology in various ways. One common way is through a set of social norms that define certain kinds of relatives, such as the cross cousins who teased Kula, as governed by reciprocity-based relationships. Such relationships are egalitarian, relaxed, and often affirmed through joking. This reciprocity can be both positive and negative, since those who get teased can, and will, tease right back. Crucially, however, these are more than long-running dyadic exchange relationships, because third parties are monitoring the pair to make sure they are behaving in the manner prescribed by the local norms for such relationships. The point that I'm slowly rolling out here is that human communities, whom we ally with, help, marry, and love, are forged by social norms which variously harness, extend, and suppress our social instincts. Our species' cooperation and sociality is deeply influenced by and highly dependent on culturally evolved social norms, which makes us rather unlike other animals. We acquire social rules by observing and learning from others, and we, at least to some degree, internalize them as goals in themselves. Because cultural learning influences how we judge others, it can create self-reinforcing, stable patterns of social behavior, social norms. This view suggests that, stripped of our social norms and beliefs, we aren't nearly as cooperative or as communal as we might seem. And to the degree that we are more cooperative than other mammalian species, and we are, it's because culturally evolved norms constructed social environments that, over eons, penalized and gradually weeded out aggressive antisocial types, norm violators, while rewarding the more sociable and docile among us. In Chapter 11, I examine the evidence suggesting that this culture gene coevolutionary process domesticated our species by shaping our psychology, making us uncomfortably similar to animals like dogs and horses. As noted, my view contrasts with that of some prominent evolutionary writers who have suggested that while the sociality and cooperation we observe in the modern world is due to modern institutions, the social behavior of small-scale societies, and especially hunter-gatherers, directly reflects our genetically evolved social psychology. This implies that the patterns of social interaction and cooperation among these populations should be explicable without reference to culturally transmitted norms, practices, or beliefs. Sociality in these populations should be easy, an automatic operation of an evolved psychology designed by natural selection to snugly fit this way of life. By contrast, if I'm right, sociality and cooperation among hunter-gatherers and everyone else should depend on norms, practices, and beliefs that amplify or suppress our innate motivations and dispositions. We've already discussed how social norms sometimes reinforce our pair bonding instincts and fatherly motivations, as well as extend our incest aversions. Now, let's zoom in a bit closer on one kind of foraging society, that of mobile hunter-gatherers, who have been routinely used to gain insights into the lives of Paleolithic societies before the spread of agriculture. Sociality and cooperation among hunter-gatherers. Mobile hunter-gatherer bands are renowned for their cooperation in activities like hunting and in their broad sharing of valuable foods, like meat. A common explanation for this cooperation has been that hunter-gatherers live in small groups of closely related individuals. If true, the argument goes, kin selection can explain much of the observed cooperation. The problem with this explanation is that the best available evidence indicates that hunter-gatherers do not live in groups mostly composed of close kin. Based on work by Kim Hill and colleagues, two pie charts show the average composition of both Juk-Wansi and Aceh bands. Primary kin includes siblings, half-siblings, and parents, while distant kin includes anyone with a blood link going back up to 5 generations, extending to second cousins. Together, these two categories, plus oneself, make up only about a quarter of the band. That means that about 3/4 of band relationships are based on something besides genetic relatedness. Among the Aceh, for which the data are most detailed, band members are on average only very distant relatives, a bit more related than second cousins, and about 1/10 that of a full brother or sister. Genealogical R equals 0.054. This tiny bit of relatedness predicts very little cooperation and guarantees that humans should be keenly tuned into distinguishing close relatives from the distant and non-relatives who compose most of the group. Overall, the similarity between these two foraging populations, one from Africa and the other from South America, is striking, and comparisons with less detailed data from 30 other hunter-gatherer societies supports this basic picture. Okay, so who are these other unrelated band members? Well, 2/3 are spouses and affines. That is, marriage norms create over half the ties in adult relationships within a band. Arguably, primates who pair bond may create bonds that are spouse-like, but as noted, no evidence suggests that primate affines hold any special relationships. Perhaps surprising to some, the evolution of in-laws may be one of the key features that make humans special. However you look at it, bands are culturally constructed, because it's only through marriage and affines that hunter-gatherer bands can be said to be mostly relatives. A remaining quarter of the band have neither blood nor affinal ties. Yet, as in most small-scale societies, they are likely all referred to by kinship terms. They aren't genetic relatives, but they are labeled as classificatory kin of some kind. Among the Juk-Wansi, as alluded to earlier, many are linked using same-name relationships. For example, if we are unrelated, you might tell me to call you Mother, because your son has the same name as I do. This tells me how I must treat you, and also cues everyone else into how I should behave toward you. For example, no flirting or sexual jokes with Mom. Through social norms, culture reinforces our kin-based and pair-bonded relationships, and dramatically expands our narrow circle from genetic kin to cultural kinship. Meat sharing. Paleoanthropologists believe that cooperative hunting and meat sharing were crucial elements in human evolution, reaching back millions of years into our past. Among those foraging peoples studied by anthropologists, meat provides an important and highly valued contribution to the diet, and as we discussed in Chapter 8, hunters generally receive much prestige from their hunting success. However, since even the best hunters can't reliably obtain game on a consistent basis, because streaks of bad luck, illness, and injury are inevitable, meat sharing has probably long been a problem that needed solving. By sharing meat, cooperative hunters can avoid the otherwise long stretches of time without fat or protein in their diets. For these reasons, some evolutionary researchers believe that the broad sharing of meat across foraging bands arises from innate psychological dispositions, without any cultural input. Could meat sharing among foragers be instinctual? A close look at food sharing among foragers reveals that it too is governed by social norms and fostered by what might be called cultural institutional technologies. For example, in addition to social norms specifying that shares of meat be delivered to certain categories of culturally constructed kin, such as the hunter's in-laws, cultural institutional technologies like ownership transfer and meat taboos operate to make sharing psychologically easier. Let's consider these in more detail. In many foraging groups, the ownership of meat is diffused or transferred from the hunter to a third party who is designated to distribute the meat. Because it wasn't their sweat and skill that produced the meat, a third party may find it easier to follow the local distributional norms. For example, Juk-Wansi hunters frequently use arrowheads owned by someone else while hunting. Social norms dictate that the owner of the arrowhead becomes the owner of any kill made with that arrowhead, and this owner has the responsibility for distributing the meat. Hunters often like to use other people's arrowheads, since it relieves them of the responsibility for making fair distributions, where fair is defined by local standards, and others will rapidly criticize any appearance of bias in the distribution. For example, elderly men and women commonly own and lend arrowheads, and anyone can receive them as gifts from one of their special XRO exchange partners, especially if they themselves can't make arrowheads. By relieving the hunter of ownership, this institution mitigates self-interested biases and disperses the responsibility for dividing the meat to others in the band who might not otherwise experience it. Food taboos also influence meat distribution in many hunter-gatherer groups, and in some groups, the entire distribution is governed by a complex system of such taboos. An interesting system of taboos was observed in the early 20th century among certain Kalahari hunter-gatherers. These taboos virtually guaranteed that large prey had to be widely distributed across the band. Here, the hunter himself could only eat the ribs and one shoulder blade. The rest of the animal was taboo for him. The hunter's wife received the meat and fat around the animal's hindquarters, which she had to cook openly and share with other women, only. Taboos prohibited young males from eating anything except for the abdominal walls, kidneys, and genitals. Violations of any of these taboos were believed to result in the failure of future hunts. Such beliefs create collective interests in making sure that other members of the band don't violate the taboos. Since your violations will result in hunting failures that will reduce my meat intake, I'm going to make sure you don't violate any taboos. Thus, everyone in the band believes they have direct and personal incentives to monitor and sanction taboo violators. Such complex systems of taboos were common, having been recorded in detail among hunter-gatherers in South America, Africa, and Indonesia. Taboos on particular game species or certain parts of animals for particular categories of people are interesting because, to the learner, they appear to be facts about the world that can drive purely self-interested actions. I want to avoid illness, and certain animal parts will cause me to get sick, so I'd best not eat those. Crucially, such beliefs induce sharing in a community without anyone realizing it. However, if such beliefs are inaccurate and costly to the individual, it's sensible to ask why either individual experience or rules like copy the successful would not result in the eventual disappearance of such taboos. Three interrelated psychological factors work against this. 1. There is reason to suspect that we humans have an innate susceptibility to picking up meat aversions due to the tendency of dead animals to carry dangerous pathogens. Thus, we humans are primed to acquire meat taboos over other food avoidances. 2. These taboos are social norms, so violations will be monitored and judged by others. This factor is especially potent here because the punishment or misfortunes believed to result from taboo violations will, often, be felt by the whole band. For example, hunting failures. 3. A good learner will acquire this rule while growing up and never actually violate it. Meat is consumed in public, so he'll never directly experience eating the tabooed part and not having bad luck. Rare cases of taboo violations that, by coincidence, were followed by bad luck or illness will be readily remembered and passed on. Psychologists call this negativity bias. Meanwhile, cases of violations followed by a long period when nothing bad happens will tend to be missed or forgotten, unless people keep and check accurate records. Based on my field experience, any skeptic who questions the taboos will be met with vivid descriptions of particular cases in which the taboos were violated, and then poor hunting, illnesses, or bad luck ensued. Amazingly, despite immense variation in the details of local social norms and beliefs, the consequences across mobile hunter-gatherers are similar. Most or all band members obtain some meat from any large kill. Of course, this doesn't mean everyone gets an equal share. In many such societies, priority extends first to the hunter's close kin, affines, and ritual partners, and only secondarily to the full band and visitors. It appears that cultural evolution has devised numerous solutions, combinations of norms, that achieve roughly the same end: a diffusion of the risks associated with repeated hunting failures across the band. Communal rituals. As darkness fell in the Kalahari Desert, Juk-Wansi women from many bands squeezed together around a blazing dance fire and began to sing in a high chorus. Then, with soft rattles made from moth cocoons wrapped around their legs, the men assembled around the women and danced in a circle, stomping out a rhythm. Soon the women began a special high-pitched clap to complement the men's rap and rattle. Accompanied by string instruments played from the periphery, the main event began as the women started to sing loudly of the Nwak, a powerful supernatural essence that can be either protective or dangerous. An hour or two later, the men's dance line began snaking through the women's circle to form a figure 8. As some men began to enter into trances, the dance intensified. Entranced men increasingly struck out into the darkness, shouting as they battled spirits and hurled invectives at their god. This ritual storm intensified and abated in cycles through the night until dawn, when it slowly faded away. Having seen 39 of these communal rituals, the ethnographer Lorna Marshall wrote, "People bind together subjectively against external forces of evil, and they bind together on an intimate social level. Whatever their relationship, whatever the state of their feelings, whether they like or dislike each other, whether they are on good terms or bad terms with each other, they become a unit, singing, clapping, moving together in an extraordinary unison of stamping feet and clapping hands, swept along by the music. Similarly, Megan Beazle, an ethnographer who studied another Jukwansi group 15 years later, explained that the dance is perhaps the central unifying force in Bushman life, binding people together in very deep ways which we do not fully understand. Psychologically powerful communal rituals like this one are common in small-scale societies and among mobile hunter-gatherers, from the Central Desert in Australia to the Great Basin in North America. Like Megan and Lorna, keen observers of human communities, such as the Muslim scholar Ibn Khaldun in the 14th century, have argued that communal rituals have a potent psychological impact on their participants and create strong personal ties, deep trust, and a profound sense of group solidarity. Recently, however, researchers have begun to systematically measure the effect of communal rituals on social bonding and cooperation, and to further break rituals down into their active ingredients. These ingredients include 1. Synchronous singing and dancing or other movements, for example, marching. 2. Collaborative music making. 3. Extreme physical exhaustion. 4. Feelings of a common fate. 5. Shared experiences of danger or terror. 6. Supernatural or mystical beliefs. And 7. Causal opacity or a lack of instrumentality. That is, people are not sure why the ritual must be done in a particular way, but they know it must be done in that way. Several recent experimental studies, for example, show that singing and or moving in synchrony with others deepens feelings of affiliation, fosters trust, and promotes cooperation within groups. In one experiment, American university students were placed into one of 4 groups. Though the groups all listened to the Canadian national anthem through headphones and could read the lyrics, each group was told to do different things, some of which involved cups. The control group just listened while holding one cup above the table. In the synchronous singing group, participants were told to sing along with the music, which caused them to sing in sync with each other. In the singing and moving in sync group, participants both sang together and moved their cups in sync with the music, which caused them to move in sync with each other. Finally, in the asynchronous singing and moving group, participants did the same thing as in the synchronous moving and singing group, except that the music in their headphones started at different times, so they all moved asynchronously. After this exercise, the participants then engaged in a cooperative project in which they could contribute money to a joint investment. The more money contributed in total by the group members to their joint project, the more money everyone would take home. However, since everyone got an equal share of the money at the end, individuals could profit by not contributing money to the project, effectively free-riding on the contributions of others. The results show that synchrony, both singing and moving together, and just singing together, promoted greater cooperative contributions, which resulted in higher monetary payoffs for the whole group. Parallel results have been found even among 4-year-old children, for whom jointly making music promotes greater prosociality. Perhaps even more enduring and powerful than synchrony are the potent social bonds forged among those who share terrifying experiences. Such experiences have been routinely created in different ways by male initiation rites in societies across the globe and throughout history, and can be found in many hunter-gatherer societies. Among the Arunta of Central Australia, for example, the initiation into manhood involved 4 main rituals that spanned roughly 15 years, from age 10 to 25 years. Based only in the local community, the first 3 of these rituals involved being thrown in the air, kidnapped at night, blindfolded, bitten, piled on by a group of men, and forced to endure periods of silence and deprivation, as well as learning much tribal lore through a series of frightening dances and song narratives performed by inhuman-looking men who were painted and costumed. The second rite in particular, performed just after their puberty started, culminated in a ritual circumcision in which a stone knife was used to cut off the adolescent's foreskin. Then, soon after these wounds had healed, a third rite would commence, and eventually climax in a ritual subincision. The boys' penises were sliced lengthwise along the underside, slit and split like a hot dog. The final initiation rite was performed on young men in their 20s, assembled from across the tribal network. Formal invitations went out to all bands, and even to neighboring groups, to gather at a particular location for a rite that would last for months, with dances and songs performed by many of the assembled bands. People believed that these invitations could not be refused, lest they get an illness as punishment. Secluded together, often deprived and silenced for months, the initiates experienced a long sequence of nighttime ceremonies, dance performances, and sacred narratives. In the final phase of this rite, the initiates had to repeatedly lie on a bed of glowing embers, with only a layer of leaves to protect them. Initiates had to stay on the embers, while choking on the smoke, until they were told they could get up, after roughly 4 to 5 minutes. Only after this ordeal by fire would these young men be considered fully fledged men of the tribe. Lest you think that these young guys somehow took this ritual in stride and were not scared, it's worth noting that it was not uncommon for adolescents and young men to flee from the advancing front of these spreading rites by moving to distant groups who had not yet adopted the practice. Nevertheless, the elderly Arunta explained that the ritual imparts courage and wisdom, and makes the men more kindly-natured and less apt to quarrel. We'll return to the spread of such rituals in Australia in Chapter 10. While systematic experimental research is just beginning on such rites of terror, it appears that the psychological effects created by these rites establish enduring emotional bonds among the initiates, and even potentially among observers. Psychologically, these rites create a potent emotional memory that somehow binds together those who shared the experience. These bonds may be closely related to those observed among soldiers who have experienced intensive combat together, creating the band of brothers phenomenon. Crucially, however, by incorporating these experiences into regular initiation rites, cultural evolution has engineered a way to solidify social ties within age cohorts of males drawn from across the tribal group. Older Arunta had themselves noticed the power of their rituals for social bonding, though they couldn't explain how or why the ritual worked, and they certainly knew of no one who had designed the protocol. More broadly, communal rituals are sets of culturally evolved social norms that, though quite diverse, often exploit various aspects of our psychology in ways that foster greater solidarity, trust, affiliation, and cooperation among participants. They represent one of the institutional cultural technologies deployed by cultural evolution to shape our sociality and cooperation across diverse societies. Even among the smallest scale human societies, communal rituals nourish the social fibers that bind a collection of bands into a tribe. Threads in the fabric of social life among bands. Perhaps the most important feature of social life in human hunter-gatherers, in contrast with other primates, is that individuals are socially connected to an immense network of other people scattered across numerous other groups. In many foraging societies, band membership itself is quite fluid. If an individual or family wants to leave their band due to some acute social tensions, drought, or just to visit friends, they can tap a network of contacts who can open the doors to extended visits in other bands. By contrast, chimpanzees live in troops that patrol and defend a territory. As I'll explain in Chapter 10, intruders are attacked and killed on sight, unless they are young females who are permitted to move among troops. Let's consider how culture made us the only tribal primate. What determines the links or social ties that foragers extend outside their band? Kim Hill, Brian Wood, and their collaborators have recently explored this among two mobile hunter-gatherer groups, the Hadza and the Ache. The Hadza live in nomadic foraging bands in Tanzania's vast savanna woodlands and continue to hunt with bow and arrow and gather roots, tubers, and honey. Kim and Brian questioned people from dozens of bands in each population about their interactions with a randomly chosen set of other adults drawn from the entire society. They asked about interactions related to helping, hunting together, and many other associations. Then, to analyze their data, they asked what relationship factors predicted the existence of various kinds of interactions, such as hunting together, giving and receiving meat, sleeping in the same camp, helping, or joking around. As expected, being close kin, ants and closer, is important, and about 5% to 10% of the other people were close kin of some kind. For example, people were overall more than twice as likely to have received food from a person when they were sick or injured if they were close relatives. Beyond genetic relatedness, affines were important too, being 50% more likely to have received food. Since affines made up 15% to 20% of the randomly selected sample, this category collectively represents a rather big contribution. Even more important than blood and affinal relationships, ritual relationships establish important social ties across bands. At Ache rituals, adult sponsors step forward to assist children through birth and puberty rites, like godparents. As part of the ritual, they then enter into a special named relationship with the child's parents. Each ritual relationship is associated with a particular role. For example, cutting the umbilical cord, washing the newborn, etc., and results in lifelong rights and obligations of mutual support governed by social norms. Being in a ritual relationship, while holding genetic relatedness constant, is strongly associated with sharing meat and information, as well as receiving help when one is sick or injured. These culturally constructed ritual relationships are much more important than close genetic relatedness, and this importance is further magnified by the fact that the Ache have twice as many ritual partners as they do close kin outside their own band. Among Hadza hunter-gatherers, the Apema taboos and ritual dances bond a select group of men in a secret covenant. Ritually, the men communally consume particular joints from large game and perform in undisturbed silence and darkness for other members of the community. Here, the data again show that ritual relationships are associated with sharing meat and information, as well as receiving help when one is sick. Not only are individual ritual relationships more important than genetic relatedness, but individuals have 3 times as many ritual partners as they do close blood relations. Taken together, ritual and affinal relationships, both of which are culturally constructed and non-existent in primates or other animals, explain much more about the patterns of association, cooperation, helping, and sharing than blood ties. Elsewhere, in southern Africa, the Jokwansi achieve the same end as the Hadza and Ache, a vast interconnected social web that threads through many bands. They, too, also rely on affinal connections and communal rituals, but they also have the XRO exchange relationships. XRO partnerships are special, culturally defined relationships that come with obligations and are sustained by ongoing exchanges of goods. Since people form and inherit many such relationships, goods given as gifts between partners pulse constantly through this broad network. XRO appears to tap our innate reciprocity psychology, but this is then fueled, extended, and reinforced by social norms, all monitored by third parties. Thus, the vast tribal social networks that mobile hunter-gatherers rely on, for example in times of drought and war, are largely constituted and nourished by social norms of various types, including those related to rituals, marriage, and exchange. Onward. Let me close by underlining my major points. Our ability to learn from each other gives rise to sets of social norms, including practices like communal rituals, food taboos, and kinship rules, which strongly influence human social life. In shaping individual decisions, social norms are powerful for a number of reasons, but they generally deploy third parties to monitor and sanction norm violators, often through reputational damage, shape individuals' perceptions of the costs and benefits of various actions. For example, food taboo violations cause hunting failures, and harness aspects of our evolved psychology, such as the way marriage reinforces our pair bonding psychology, or rituals exploit the cooperation-inducing effects of synchrony. Such social norms are crucial for understanding community and cooperation in all human societies, including those of mobile hunter-gatherers. Detailed studies of contemporary hunter-gatherers show how practices related to marriage, naming, exchange, and ritual influence the formation of bands and spin the broader social threads that weave bands together into tribes. Even meat sharing in hunter-gatherer bands, which is often argued to be an ancient and important feature of our species' evolutionary history, depends crucially on culturally constructed kinship ties, social norms of ownership, food taboos, and ritual practices. Until now, I have casually described a variety of social norms that appear to promote sociality, harmony, and cooperation among the groups possessing them. But clearly, in many cases, people don't understand how or why their norms work, or that their norms are even doing anything. And in the cases of the food taboos and communal rituals, it's probably the case that if people knew precisely what was going on, if they had the correct causal model, the practices would lose at least some of their effectiveness. So, how can we explain the emergence of such group beneficial norms?